Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, esteemed members of the international community, and honored guests, today we find ourselves at a moment in history that demands not only our attention but our decisive action. The conflict in Ukraine, now extending beyond months and years, has evolved into one of the most pressing crises of our time. It is a crisis that transcends national boundaries, reaches into the very core of human dignity, and challenges the principles upon which international law and global cooperation are founded. The unfolding events in Ukraine have inflicted deep and lasting scars on the population, with millions displaced, countless lives lost, and communities devastated by violence and instability. The magnitude of human suffering is immense, and the consequences of inaction or delayed action extend far beyond the borders of a single nation, threatening regional stability and global security. It is within this context, under these extraordinary circumstances, that we must recognize the urgent need to prioritize dialogue, to convene in good faith, and to initiate comprehensive peace talks that seek not only an immediate cessation of hostilities but a long-term framework for enduring stability and cooperation. The devastation wrought by conflict is never merely a matter of statistics or geopolitical maneuvering. It is a human tragedy, a moral imperative that calls upon the conscience of the global community. Each life lost, each family torn apart, each child deprived of the opportunity to learn and grow in safety represents a profound failure of the mechanisms that should protect human welfare and prevent the descent into chaos. We are reminded that war is not only a matter of military strategy or territorial control, it is a corrosive force that erodes the very foundations of society, disrupts economic activity, undermines healthcare and education, and leaves a generation scarred both psychologically and socially. In Ukraine, the effects have been pronounced: cities reduced to rubble, vital infrastructure rendered inoperative, economic systems teetering on the brink of collapse, and the social fabric of communities strained to the breaking point. Every day that violence continues without interruption is a day that sees the deepening of mistrust, the hardening of resentment, and the potential radicalization of those who feel powerless and unheard. It is for this reason that dialogue, negotiation, and structured peace processes are not optional but essential instruments to halt the trajectory of destruction. Furthermore, the urgency of initiating peace talks stems not only from the humanitarian imperative but also from the geopolitical realities that accompany protracted conflict. The instability in Ukraine has reverberated through global markets, disrupted trade routes, and exacerbated energy insecurities, affecting nations far removed from the immediate theater of conflict. Food security has been threatened, with agricultural production disrupted and supply chains fractured, resulting in global price spikes that disproportionately affect the most vulnerable populations worldwide. These ripple effects underscore the interdependence of nations in an increasingly connected world, where a crisis in one region inevitably produces consequences in others. Beyond economic considerations, the ongoing conflict has created a climate of insecurity that fosters the proliferation of arms, encourages militarization, and undermines diplomatic norms. If left unchecked, the patterns established during this conflict may set dangerous precedents, eroding trust in international institutions and weakening the collective ability of nations to respond to crises through cooperative rather than confrontational means. Therefore, initiating peace talks is not merely a localized act of conflict resolution. It is a reaffirmation of the principles of diplomacy, the rule of law, and the shared responsibility of the global community to prevent escalation and protect human civilization from the ravages of unbridled violence. The call for immediate dialogue also rests on the principle that peace is most sustainable when it is comprehensive, inclusive, and rooted in mutual recognition of the legitimate concerns of all parties involved. Negotiations must not be superficial or symbolic, they must be substantive, transparent, and accountable. All stakeholders, state actors, regional organizations, civil society, and affected communities must have their voices heard, their grievances acknowledged, and their interests considered in the formulation of a durable settlement. History teaches us that agreements imposed unilaterally or without genuine engagement often fail, leaving the seeds of renewed conflict for the next generation. Conversely, when dialogue is inclusive and predicated upon mutual respect, there emerges an opportunity to rebuild trust, to foster reconciliation, and to lay the foundation for institutions that can mediate future disputes peacefully. In the case of Ukraine, this principle is particularly relevant given the deep historical, cultural, and political complexities at play. Only through patient negotiation, guided by impartial mediation, can these complexities be addressed in a manner that prioritizes human well-being over short-term political advantage, ensuring that peace is both achievable and enduring.
Moreover, initiating peace talks at this juncture is a demonstration of moral leadership by the international community.
It signals to the world that, despite the temptation to resort to unilateral action, coercion, or military escalation, there remains a commitment to dialogue, compromise, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. It reflects an acknowledgement that the path of war is not inevitable and that the shared values of humanity, life, dignity, and justice must guide decisions in moments of crisis. By taking decisive steps toward structured negotiations, the global community reinforces the norms and expectations that define responsible international conduct, promoting the idea that differences, no matter how profound, can be reconciled through reasoned discourse and collaborative problem solving. In doing so, we not only address the immediate conflict in Ukraine but also strengthen the broader architecture of peace and security upon which global stability depends. In conclusion, the decision to launch peace talks is not simply a strategic choice, it is a humanitarian, moral, and political imperative that addresses the full spectrum of consequences arising from the conflict in Ukraine. It is an acknowledgement that war brings devastation not only to those directly involved but to all humanity, disrupting lives, economies, and the social contract that binds societies together. By prioritizing dialogue, structured negotiation, and inclusive participation, we chart a course toward resolution that preserves human dignity, restores stability, and fosters hope for a better future. Today, as we convene to deliberate, to plan, and to commit ourselves to action, we embrace the profound responsibility of leadership and moral courage. We assert, unequivocally, that peace is possible, that negotiation is necessary, and that the time for decisive action is now. The people of Ukraine, the surrounding region, and indeed the entire world deserve no less than our utmost effort, guided by reason, compassion, and the unwavering commitment to a future free from the shadows of conflict. Distinguished colleagues, as we advance our discussion regarding the launch of peace talks in Ukraine, it is imperative that we recognize the essential principles that must underpin every step of the negotiation process. Peace cannot be a mere absence of conflict or a temporary ceasefire. It must be constructed on a foundation of transparency, accountability, respect for human rights, and the active participation of all relevant stakeholders. Without these pillars, any agreement risks being superficial, fragile, and ultimately unsustainable. Transparency in negotiations is not simply a procedural requirement, it is a mechanism through which trust is built, accountability is ensured, and the perception of fairness is maintained. When parties can see that discussions are conducted openly, with clear intentions, and without hidden agendas, the likelihood of adherence to agreed-upon commitments increases significantly. In the context of Ukraine, transparency must be exercised not only between the negotiating parties themselves but also with the international community, including neutral mediators, regional organizations, and civil society, which can provide oversight, guidance, and support to ensure that agreements are implemented faithfully and in good faith. Equally crucial is the unwavering commitment to human rights, which must remain at the core of every stage of the peace process. The conflict in Ukraine has produced countless violations, from the targeting of civilians to the displacement of millions, and from the destruction of essential infrastructure to the disruption of access to food, healthcare, and education. Each violation represents not only a legal and ethical transgression but a profound obstacle to the rebuilding of society. Negotiators must therefore place human dignity, the protection of life, and the safeguarding of fundamental freedoms at the forefront of every discussion. Policies and agreements must be designed with the explicit intention of restoring security and stability to civilian populations, ensuring that displaced persons can return safely to their homes, that humanitarian aid is distributed equitably, and that justice is pursued for those who have suffered harm. In practice, this requires that both parties acknowledge past wrongs, commit to preventing further violations, and work collaboratively with independent monitoring bodies to verify compliance. By doing so, peace becomes not only a political objective but a moral imperative, reinforcing the legitimacy and durability of any settlement. The inclusivity of the negotiation process is another determinant of sustainable peace. Peace agreements that exclude key actors, ignore minority voices, or neglect local communities often fail because they leave unaddressed the grievances that initially fueled the conflict. In Ukraine, this inclusivity must extend to all regions affected by the conflict, ensuring that representatives from civil society, local governance, and community organizations have meaningful opportunities to contribute to discussions about security arrangements, reconstruction priorities, and social reconciliation initiatives. Furthermore, the inclusion of women, youth, and marginalized groups is not merely a symbolic gesture but a practical necessity, as diverse perspectives yield more comprehensive, resilient, and contextually relevant solutions. Negotiations that genuinely integrate the full spectrum of stakeholders are better positioned to anticipate challenges, identify potential sources of friction, and design mechanisms that address grievances before they escalate into renewed violence. By committing to inclusivity, negotiators signal that the peace process is not a top-down imposition but a collaborative effort, grounded in legitimacy, equity, and shared responsibility for the future. The role of the international community in facilitating, supporting, and monitoring peace talks cannot be overstated. The global response to the conflict in Ukraine has revealed both the potential and the necessity of coordinated international action. Multilateral organizations, neutral mediators, and regional partners have a unique capacity to provide technical expertise, logistical support, and impartial oversight that enhances the credibility and effectiveness of negotiations. Their involvement also serves as a safeguard against violations, ensuring that commitments made at the negotiation table are translated into tangible outcomes on the ground. Additionally, international support can bolster confidence-building measures, offering mechanisms such as third-party verification, conflict resolution training, and economic incentives that encourage compliance and reduce incentives for recalcitrance. Importantly, the participation of global actors in the process must be guided by impartiality, respect for sovereignty, and adherence to international law, avoiding any perception of bias or external imposition. When executed with integrity, international involvement can transform peace negotiations from a localized initiative into a globally recognized standard of conflict resolution, setting a precedent for how disputes are managed in the 21st century.
We must also consider that peace in Ukraine will be a dynamic, iterative process rather than a singular event.
Initial agreements are likely to address immediate security concerns and humanitarian needs, but comprehensive peace requires long-term frameworks that include mechanisms for monitoring compliance, addressing emerging challenges, and adapting to evolving circumstances. Transparency and human rights protections must therefore be embedded in these frameworks, with clear accountability measures and avenues for redress in cases of violations. International partners can play a pivotal role in ensuring that these mechanisms are effective, providing technical assistance, mediation support, and continuous evaluation of progress. This approach ensures that peace is not temporary or contingent upon fleeting political expediency, but rather resilient, adaptive, and capable of sustaining stability over the long term. Furthermore, by demonstrating a commitment to continuous improvement and responsiveness, negotiators reinforce the legitimacy of the process and foster enduring confidence among the population that the peace agreement is a credible, actionable pathway to security and prosperity. In addition to formal structures and institutional mechanisms, the process of building trust is fundamental. Trust cannot be assumed, it must be earned through consistent, verifiable actions, demonstrated commitments, and sustained engagement. Confidence-building measures, such as localized ceasefires, joint humanitarian initiatives, and cooperative reconstruction projects, can create tangible evidence of progress, mitigating skepticism and encouraging continued participation. These measures also provide an opportunity for communities to witness the benefits of collaboration firsthand, reinforcing the human dimension of negotiations and emphasizing that peace is not an abstract goal but a lived reality with immediate impact on daily life. Trust building is particularly essential in Ukraine, given the historical, political, and social complexities that have contributed to deep divisions. By prioritizing trust alongside transparency and human rights, negotiators can create a virtuous cycle in which each successful initiative reinforces the credibility of the process and lays the groundwork for broader, more comprehensive agreements. Finally, the moral responsibility of all actors involved must remain at the forefront of deliberations. Peace negotiations are not merely a strategic exercise, they are an ethical undertaking with consequences that reverberate across generations. The choices made today will determine whether children in Ukraine grow up in an environment of security and opportunity or in the shadow of unresolved conflict and social fragmentation. Each concession, agreement, and compromise represents a step toward preserving life, restoring dignity, and enabling the reconstruction of society. It is incumbent upon negotiators, mediators, and supporting international actors to approach the process with humility, patience, and a steadfast commitment to justice. By doing so, the peace process transcends transactional politics and becomes a profound expression of shared humanity, a commitment to the principle that even in the darkest moments of conflict, dialogue, understanding, and cooperation can prevail. In sum, paragraph 2 emphasizes that sustainable peace in Ukraine requires transparency, respect for human rights, inclusivity, robust international support, iterative frameworks, trust-building measures, and unwavering moral responsibility.
Negotiations conducted under these principles are more likely to produce enduring solutions that protect lives, restore stability, and demonstrate the potential of diplomacy over violence.
By embedding these values into the heart of the peace process, we create not only a pathway out of the current conflict but a blueprint for responsible, principled, and humane conflict resolution for the global community. Esteemed colleagues, distinguished delegates, and members of the international community, as we proceed further in our discussion regarding the launch of peace talks in Ukraine, it becomes imperative to shift our focus from theoretical imperatives to the tangible, practical steps that must be taken to translate the aspiration for peace into reality. While principles, moral arguments, and human rights frameworks provide the foundation for negotiation, the true test of a peace process lies in its execution, the creation of actionable plans, the establishment of mechanisms for implementation, and the sustained commitment to follow through on agreements. In the context of Ukraine, this requires the design of a comprehensive, structured roadmap that addresses both immediate security concerns and the long-term reconstruction and reconciliation needs of the nation. Such a roadmap cannot be simplistic or limited in scope. It must encompass multiple dimensions, including humanitarian assistance, economic stabilization, social cohesion, political legitimacy, security arrangements, and regional cooperation. The development of this roadmap is not a linear or static process. It must be iterative, adaptable, and informed by ongoing monitoring, evaluation, and engagement with all stakeholders to ensure that it remains relevant, feasible, and effective over time. At the outset, the immediate priority must be to halt hostilities and establish a credible, verifiable ceasefire. Without a cessation of violence, no further measures can be meaningfully implemented, and negotiations risk being rendered moot by ongoing conflict. Achieving a ceasefire requires coordination among military and political leaders, the deployment of neutral observers, and the creation of communication channels that allow for rapid resolution of misunderstandings or violations. These initial steps serve as both a practical measure and a symbolic commitment to dialogue, signaling to local populations, international partners, and adversarial actors that a genuine effort is underway to prioritize human life and safety over confrontation. The implementation of a ceasefire must be complemented by robust monitoring mechanisms, including independent verification by international observers, transparent reporting structures, and clear protocols for accountability in cases of non-compliance. By establishing these measures at the outset, negotiators create a foundation of trust and credibility upon which subsequent phases of the peace process can be built. Once immediate security concerns are addressed, the roadmap must turn toward the urgent humanitarian needs of affected populations. The conflict in Ukraine has displaced millions, disrupted essential services, and created widespread food insecurity, medical shortages, and infrastructure collapse. Addressing these needs requires coordinated humanitarian response efforts, including the distribution of food, water, medical supplies, and temporary shelter, as well as the restoration of critical services such as electricity, healthcare, and education. Humanitarian assistance must be delivered in a manner that is impartial, equitable, and sensitive to the diverse needs of all affected communities, including minority populations, internally displaced persons, and vulnerable groups such as children, the elderly, and the disabled. Furthermore, humanitarian initiatives should be integrated into the broader framework of the peace process, ensuring that aid not only alleviates immediate suffering but also contributes to longer-term stability by rebuilding trust between communities, reinforcing the legitimacy of governing institutions, and promoting social cohesion. Effective coordination between local authorities, civil society organizations, and international humanitarian agencies is essential to ensure that resources are used efficiently, that gaps in service provision are minimized, and that assistance reaches those who need it most without delay or discrimination. In parallel with humanitarian interventions, economic stabilization and reconstruction must be prioritized as central components of the peace roadmap. Conflict has devastated Ukraine's economy, disrupting trade, crippling industry, and undermining livelihoods for millions of citizens. Without economic recovery, peace agreements risk being undermined by persistent poverty, social discontent, and renewed political instability. Therefore, the roadmap must include detailed strategies for economic revitalization, including the restoration of critical infrastructure such as transportation networks, energy systems, and communications networks, the provision of financial assistance and incentives for businesses, and the development of policies that encourage domestic investment, job creation, and sustainable development. Additionally, regional and international economic partnerships can play a critical role by providing technical expertise, financial support, and access to global markets. By coupling security and humanitarian measures with robust economic planning, negotiators ensure that peace is not merely the absence of conflict but the presence of opportunities, prosperity, and hope for the population at large. Another essential element of the roadmap is the establishment of confidence-building measures designed to foster trust among parties and communities that have experienced years of violence and mistrust. Confidence-building initiatives may include localized ceasefires, joint humanitarian projects, shared security patrols, demilitarized zones, and collaborative reconstruction efforts. These measures provide tangible evidence of commitment to peace, demonstrating that cooperation is both possible and beneficial. Additionally, the establishment of joint committees to oversee the implementation of agreements, resolve disputes, and monitor compliance is critical to maintaining momentum in the negotiation process. Such committees must be inclusive, comprising representatives from both parties, neutral mediators, and civil society actors, ensuring that oversight is fair, transparent, and credible. Confidence-building measures must also extend to the population, with community engagement programs, dialogue initiatives, and reconciliation efforts that address historical grievances, foster mutual understanding, and promote social cohesion. By prioritizing trust-building alongside formal agreements, negotiators increase the likelihood that peace will be sustainable and that the cycle of conflict will be broken for future generations. Security arrangements form another cornerstone of a practical roadmap to peace. While halting active hostilities is an immediate priority, long-term stability requires comprehensive security measures that address the underlying drivers of conflict, prevent the resurgence of violence, and protect vulnerable populations. This may include the restructuring or reintegration of military forces, the establishment of joint monitoring mechanisms, disarmament programs, and the development of local policing and community security initiatives. Security arrangements must be designed collaboratively, ensuring that both parties perceive them as equitable, balanced, and enforceable. Moreover, regional cooperation is essential, as neighboring countries and international actors can provide guarantees, mediation, and support to reinforce the credibility of security arrangements. By embedding security measures into the roadmap from the outset, negotiators provide a framework that safeguards the progress achieved in negotiations and reduces the risk of setbacks that could reignite conflict. Political legitimacy and governance are equally critical in ensuring the sustainability of peace. Negotiations must consider the establishment or strengthening of institutions that reflect democratic principles, respect for the rule of law, and responsiveness to the needs of the population. Transitional governance mechanisms, inclusive political representation, and mechanisms for public accountability contribute to the credibility and resilience of post-conflict institutions. By incorporating political reforms into the roadmap, negotiators can address structural causes of conflict, prevent the marginalization of key groups, and create conditions conducive to social cohesion, economic recovery, and long-term stability. In addition, international partners can provide technical assistance, capacity-building programs, and support for electoral processes to ensure that governance structures are effective, transparent, and capable of sustaining peace over time. Finally, the roadmap must recognize that peace is a process, not an endpoint. The implementation of agreements requires continuous monitoring, assessment, and adaptation to evolving circumstances. Mechanisms for evaluation, conflict early warning systems, and structured avenues for dialogue can help address emerging challenges before they escalate. International partners can assist by providing expertise, verification mechanisms, and mediation support, ensuring that the peace process remains dynamic, responsive, and resilient. By combining immediate security measures, humanitarian aid, economic recovery, confidence-building initiatives, security arrangements, and governance reforms into a coherent, actionable roadmap, negotiators create a practical pathway from conflict to sustainable peace. Such a roadmap demonstrates that peace is achievable, measurable, and capable of improving the lives of millions, while also reinforcing the principles of diplomacy, collaboration, and shared responsibility for humanity. Distinguished colleagues, honored delegates, and members of the global community, as we reach the culmination of this discussion on launching peace talks for Ukraine, it is imperative to reflect upon the broader moral and ethical dimensions that underpin this endeavor. Peace is not merely the cessation of hostilities or the signing of agreements, it is a profound moral responsibility that demands the collective engagement, integrity, and conscientious action of all actors involved.
In Ukraine, the human cost of conflict has been staggering, with millions displaced, countless lives lost, and generations traumatized by violence and insecurity.
To ignore this human suffering, or to allow political expediency or self-interest to overshadow humanitarian obligations, would not only be a failure of diplomacy but a failure of conscience. Therefore, every decision, every negotiation, and every action taken within the framework of peace talks must be guided by the recognition that human life, dignity, and well-being are paramount. This moral imperative transcends national boundaries, ideological divides, and temporal considerations, reminding us that peace is a shared responsibility with consequences that extend far beyond the immediate context of conflict. The responsibility of the international community in facilitating and sustaining peace in Ukraine is immense and cannot be understated. The world has both the capacity and the obligation to act decisively to prevent further escalation, protect vulnerable populations, and ensure that the principles of justice, human rights, and equity guide the negotiation process. Global actors, including regional organizations, multilateral institutions, and individual states, play a critical role in providing impartial mediation, technical assistance, verification mechanisms, and resources that enable negotiations to succeed. Their engagement must be grounded in impartiality, respect for sovereignty, and adherence to international norms, ensuring that support strengthens rather than undermines the legitimacy of the process. By assuming this responsibility, the international community not only addresses the immediate crisis but also reinforces the broader framework of collective security and cooperation that sustains peace across nations and regions. The commitment of global actors to the Ukrainian peace process signals to the world that diplomacy, dialogue, and collaboration are the preferred and effective means of resolving conflicts, setting a standard for addressing crises in other parts of the globe. Furthermore, achieving sustainable peace in Ukraine requires a vision that extends beyond immediate conflict resolution. True peace encompasses not only the absence of violence but the presence of justice, opportunity, and resilience within society. It demands that the underlying causes of conflict, whether political marginalization, economic deprivation, social inequality, or historical grievances, are addressed comprehensively and equitably. Reconciliation initiatives, social cohesion programs, and community-based development projects are essential for healing divisions and fostering trust among populations that have experienced profound trauma and mistrust. Educational programs, cultural initiatives, and inter-community dialogues serve as mechanisms for rebuilding social capital, promoting empathy, and nurturing a shared sense of belonging that strengthens the foundations of peace. By investing in these long-term initiatives, negotiators and international partners signal that peace is not an endpoint to be celebrated briefly, but a continuous endeavor that requires vigilance, commitment, and adaptive strategies to withstand challenges and ensure sustainability. The moral dimension of peace negotiations also includes an ethical commitment to future generations. The children growing up in Ukraine today are the inheritors of the decisions made by the global community and national leaders. Their prospects for education, personal development, security, and opportunity are inextricably linked to the success or failure of these peace initiatives. By committing to a comprehensive, inclusive, and principled negotiation process, we demonstrate that we are mindful of the long-term consequences of our actions and that we are willing to prioritize the interests of those who cannot yet advocate for themselves. This intergenerational responsibility underscores the need for sustainable frameworks that go beyond temporary agreements or reactive measures. It requires structural reforms, resilient institutions, and mechanisms for monitoring compliance that ensure the gains achieved through negotiations are maintained and reinforced over time. In essence, the ethical imperative of peace is inseparable from the responsibility to create a world in which future generations can thrive in security, dignity, and opportunity. In addition to moral and ethical considerations, the vision for peace must be grounded in practical, strategic, and diplomatic foresight. Sustainable peace in Ukraine necessitates a multi-level approach that integrates local, national, and international perspectives. Locally, communities must be empowered to participate meaningfully in rebuilding governance structures, addressing social grievances, and contributing to reconciliation processes.
Nationally, political institutions must be strengthened to provide inclusive representation, equitable governance, and transparent decision-making.
Internationally, the broader community must remain engaged through mechanisms of support, monitoring, and constructive mediation to ensure that agreements are implemented effectively and conflicts do not reignite. By aligning these levels of engagement, peace initiatives gain both legitimacy and efficacy, demonstrating that diplomacy is not limited to elite negotiations but extends to the lived experiences of communities and the structural stability of nations. This multi-level vision ensures that peace is resilient, adaptable, and capable of withstanding future pressures, while simultaneously providing a framework for development, cooperation, and long-term prosperity. Moreover, achieving lasting peace requires a shared commitment to dialogue, compromise, and mutual understanding. The process of negotiation itself is transformative, offering opportunities for adversaries to recognize shared interests, confront biases, and identify solutions that balance competing priorities. In Ukraine, this means creating forums in which all voices, state actors, civil society, minority communities, and international stakeholders are represented and heard. It requires a willingness to acknowledge past injustices, to make concessions where necessary, and to pursue innovative solutions that prioritize collective well-being over individual or political gain. Dialogue and compromise are not signs of weakness, they are expressions of strength, foresight, and the recognition that sustainable peace can only emerge from cooperation, not coercion. By fostering an environment in which differences are addressed constructively and collaboratively, negotiators create the conditions for agreements that are not only accepted but embraced by the broader population, enhancing legitimacy and adherence.
Finally, the vision for lasting peace in Ukraine and indeed globally rests on the recognition that conflict resolution is a continuous, dynamic process.
Peace is not a finite goal but a living, evolving practice that requires ongoing engagement, vigilance, and adaptation. Mechanisms for monitoring, evaluation, and conflict early warning must be institutionalized to identify and respond to emerging challenges proactively. Confidence-building measures, community reconciliation initiatives, and inclusive governance practices must be maintained and strengthened over time. International partners must remain committed to supporting these processes, providing technical assistance, mediation, and resources while respecting the agency and sovereignty of national actors. By approaching peace as a continuous endeavor, the international community ensures that the achievements of negotiations are preserved, that gains in human security and societal stability are consolidated, and that the lessons learned can inform approaches to conflict resolution elsewhere in the world.